Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It is Wednesday, March 13th. I took about a week off just to get some things done around the house that I needed to do. My youngest started her track season this week, so it's been busy, but I'm back. I was trying to figure out what I'm going to do between now and when Chad Daybell's trial starts, which is April 1st, and Scott Peterson is back in the news. That is a case that I followed closely. I wasn't in true crime at the time, but it was just one of those that hooked me from the beginning. And I'll tell you what, I never had on my bingo card that any kind of Innocence Project would be taking up Scott Peterson's case, but here we are. So what we're going to do today, we're going to go through a rough timeline and the main facts of the case. Then on the next few episodes, we're going to dig deeper into what we go through today to bring you the whole story, because I really do want to keep up with this until the decision is made whether or not he gets a new trial. Before we get started, you know what to do. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Just click that little bell icon. Music fact of the day. Eddie Van Halen had an unpaid and initially an uncredited appearance with his guitar solo on Michael Jackson's hit song, Beat It. Scott attended the hearing yesterday through Zoom, and in fact, in future hearings, his preference is to continue to appear through Zoom at the prison he's currently at. He was convicted in 2004 after a 5-month trial that started on June 1st, 2004 and ended on November 3rd, 2004. He was convicted of murdering his wife, Lacy, and their unborn son, Connor, on Christmas Eve, 2002. Lacy was 8 months pregnant when she vanished. Scott said he was fishing alone and returned home to find Lacy gone. Their bodies washed ashore in April of 2003. The LA Innocence Project took his case on. Now, this is not to be confused with the Innocence Project. They actually had to tweet out, "This is not on them," after there was a lot of backlash by people chastising them for taking on a case where it seems pretty clear he did it. At his hearing yesterday, one big piece of evidence his lawyers are focusing on is a burnt orange van that was found a mile away from Scott and Lacy's home. The area was known for vehicle thefts and fires, and a fire investigator determined the blaze was set intentionally on Christmas Day. The fire investigator said this vehicle fire appeared to be unusual in that the vehicle had not been stripped for parts. The possible motivation for this vehicle fire was the disposal of evidence of a crime. Inside that van, they found a burned mattress with what they believed to be blood on it. The van belonged to a moving and a rigging company. The owner of that company said the van had been stolen and it did not have that mattress inside when it was taken. There are other pending motions, including one for post-conviction DNA testing. That's regarding the van that was near Scott and Lacy's home. It was also involved in a burglary near their house around the time Lacy went missing. They're requesting DNA testing of several pieces of evidence. In January, after the LA Innocence Project took up his case, Scott wrote in a declaration, "I did not harm or kill my family." And newly discovered evidence that was not presented to the jury at my trial supports my claims of innocence. He said police ignored evidence and said eyewitnesses reported seeing Lacy alive the day she went missing. She was walking her dog. Scott's former attorney actually appealed to the LA Innocence Project in March of last year to take his case, and then Scott himself did as well. The team gathered 40,000 pages of records, and Paula Mitchell, who is the director of the LA Innocence Project, said there were numerous items in police reports that were not included in the initial discovery in the case. They also allege law enforcement did not investigate other possible suspects fully, including the people who were charged in that burglary of a neighbor's home. Their filing is asking to release police reports of the burning of the van related to that burglary. A fire investigator told NBC News, and I'm not sure at what point, whether this was in the past or more current, the fire investigator was bothered that was not looked into as a potential link between the burned van and Lacy's disappearance. In court, Paula Mitchell argued that materials should be given to them as soon as possible, saying, "Mr. Peterson has been waiting 20 years to find some of these police reports and audio recordings and video recordings that should have been provided." We are eager to get our investigation underway. They also want to do further DNA testing on part of the mattress, the vehicle's fuel tank, a Target bag which was found near the remains of Laci, the contents of that bag, and also tape that was recovered from her pants. After court yesterday, his attorney, Paula Canny, said, "What if he's not guilty, okay? What if he had an affair and was a crappy husband? What if he didn't kill her? If that DNA testing shows what we think it's going to show, it's a whole new ballgame, so to speak." She also points out the organization only represents people who the project believes is innocent and can be exonerated by DNA evidence, and that's why they've taken this up. Scott's sister-in-law, Janie Peterson, has also long maintained that Scott was innocent. If you're watching on YouTube, this is what I believe they call their war room. They have a lot of things related to the investigation and the trial in this room. She has pushed for a very long time for a new trial for Scott. Well, let's look at just a very rough timeline. Like I said, we're going to go back and go in between these timelines. But on December 24th of 2002, Laci is reported missing. January 24th of 2003, Amber Frey, she's a massage therapist from Fresno, California, comes forward at a police news conference saying she had been having an affair with Scott. That affair began on November 20th, so just a month before Laci went missing. Scott told Amber he was single and had no kids. They met on a blind date through her friend Sean. Sean had met Scott at a trade show in Anaheim, and she thought Scott would be perfect for Amber. On April 18th of 2003, police confirmed they found the bodies of Laci and Connor in the San Francisco Bay. Connor was found on April 13th, and the next day, Laci was found. On April 18th, 2003, Scott Peterson was arrested in San Diego, California. He had dyed his hair blonde. He had cash on him. He had camping gear, and the pending charges were capital murder and double homicide charges. On April 21st, Scott was arraigned and charged with 2 felony murders with premeditation and special circumstances. He pleaded not guilty. May 2nd of 2003, Mark Garagos comes on as Scott's attorney. September 26th of 2003, Laci's family files a civil suit against Scott to prevent him from selling his story. Then on December 19th of 2003, Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha, sues Scott for $5 million in a wrongful death suit. That was later dropped in 2009. January 20th of 2004, the trial is moved to San Mateo County. March 4th of 2004, jury selection begins, and ultimately, that jury was made up of 6 men and 6 women, as well as 6 alternates. June 1st of 2004, the trial begins. June 21st, the judge tells the jury to be careful around and inside the courthouse. Juror number 5 was seen talking to Laci's brother, Brent, at that security checkpoint to get inside the courthouse. 2 days later, on June 23rd, that juror was excused. On August 10th, Amber testifies and says Scott told her he was a widower, also that he lied about where he lived and about his travels. They play conversations between the two that were recorded when Amber was working with police. November 3rd, the jury gets the case. November 12th of 2004, Scott was found guilty of first-degree murder for Laci, second-degree murder for Connor. On December 13th of 2004, the jury recommended death, which the judge imposed on March 16th, 2005. Moving forward a lot of years to August 24th of 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence, and he is resentenced to life on December 8th of 2021. The reason the death penalty was overturned was due to the improper dismissal of some jurors over them disagreeing with the death penalty as a punishment. At his resentencing, Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha, said, "I've seen no sorrow or no remorse from you at all. I know you're going to say you have no remorse because you're innocent, but you haven't shown any grief or sorrow for either of them. I still feel the grief every day after 19 years. No matter what happens, no matter what transpires in the future, there are 2 things that will never change. Laci and Connor will always be dead, and you will always be their murderer." October of 2022, Scott is moved from the notorious San Quentin prison to Mule Creek State Prison. December of 2022, Scott was denied a new trial. His argument was that a juror lied about her personal history with abuse to be on that jury. Ultimately, the judge said there was no actual evidence to support his position. April of 2023, his attorneys filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus saying violations of state and federal constitutional rights and state statutory rights, including a claim of actual innocence that is supported by newly discovered evidence. That was denied. January of 2024, this year, the Los Angeles Innocence Project takes this case and begins representing Scott. On March 12th, just yesterday, Scott had a hearing. The director of the project, Paula Mitchell, said in a statement, the Los Angeles Innocence Project filed motions in January asking the court to order further discovery of evidence and allow new DNA testing to support our investigation into Mr. Peterson's claim of actual innocence. She said today's hearing was just the first step in a long process. We have not commented on our motions, and we will continue to present our case in court. One of the motions asked for a court order regarding the testing of evidence from the original trial for DNA evidence. Those items include cloth from a mattress from that orange van, the one that was set on fire in Modesto on Christmas morning 2002. They also want other items from that van, a grocery bag with duct tape that was found near Lacy's body, and items found at a home that had been broken into near where Lacy and Scott lived. Scott's original attorney, Mark Garagos, gave a statement to NBC LA in January about the LA Innocence Project taking on Scott's case. He said, the Innocence Project taking on the case speaks volumes. It tells you, number one, they have vetted it. Number two, they have taken a look at this case in every which way. The LA Innocence Project has a track record that is nationally unparalleled. It's every person's dream who has been falsely convicted to have the LA Innocence Project take on their case. One red flag for me as this unfolded in the media way back when was how Scott very quickly referred to Lacy in the past tense. That's always a big red flag for me because if somebody's missing, you hope you find them. And for the most part, your brain can't compute they're dead. And for me, it just always says they know something we don't know. How did Scott and Lacy meet? They met in San Luis Obispo. Lacy was in college and Scott worked in a restaurant. They married in 1997 and they actually opened a restaurant together in the area. In 2000, they moved to Modesto, California, where Lacy started working as a substitute teacher and Scott ran a startup fertilizer company out of a leased warehouse. A few years later, Lacy got pregnant with Connor and her due date was February of 2003. Back to December 23rd, 2002. Lacy went grocery shopping and had a checkup with her OB. That afternoon, Lacy and Scott went to a salon where Lacy's sister Amy worked. Amy told them she had ordered a gift basket that needed to be picked up the next day on Christmas Eve by 3 p.m. And Scott offered to get it for her since it would be close to where he was going to go golfing. Scott invited Lacy's sister to dinner, but she declined, saying she had other plans. That night, Lacy spoke to her mother, Sharon, over the phone, and they made plans to have a Christmas Eve dinner the next day. Moving on to December 24th. At 10:18 a.m., a neighbor of Scott and Lacy saw their dog, Mackenzie, wandering alone on their street with the leash still on. Scott's truck wasn't home, but Lacy's car was, so the neighbor just put the dog in Scott and Lacy's fenced-in backyard. Now let's look at his police interview. We're not diving too deep into this today. We will on a future episode, but this directly relates to what Scott says were Lacy's last movements before he left. This interview, by the way, was Christmas Day. He said the day before, on the 24th, Lacy got up and had cereal for breakfast. He said she would eat as soon as she got up because otherwise she would get morning sickness. Scott said he laid in bed a bit longer, got up and showered, and they were watching Lacy's favorite show, which was Martha Stewart. They watched in a room that had been converted from a garage into a living room. The investigator asked if they watched all of it, and he said no. So the investigator asked what part of the show he remembers. He said it was some cooking deal, cookies or some sort, talking about what to do with meringue. Just as a note, 3 days prior, Scott bought a 2-day fishing license on December 23rd. Now, the day Lacy went missing, Scott said he was deciding whether to go play golf at the club or go fishing. He said it seemed too cold to play golf, and he kind of gives this weird laugh after he says this. But ultimately, he decided that morning to go fishing in the San Francisco Bay. Lacy told him she planned to finish cleaning up, mopping the kitchen floor, taking their dog for a walk, and then going to the store later to get things for Christmas breakfast. Scott said he drove to his company warehouse where his boat was being stored, and from there he drove to the Berkeley Marina. He fished for about an hour and a half in an area later identified as Brooks Island. He said he cut the fishing trip short because it was cold and rainy. He didn't pack a lunch, and he didn't stop on the way there or back. That afternoon, Lacy's stepdad, Ron, tried to contact her with no luck. At 3:45 p.m., Lacy's sister Amy got a call informing her that the gift basket she ordered had not been picked up. She tried to call Scott, but got no answer. Scott said he tried to call Lacy on her cell phone as well as their landline, but got no answer. He says he left 2 voicemails, but investigators found only 1 voicemail on her phone from him. He said he dropped the boat off at the warehouse and went home. He said he got home at 4:30, but neighbors said his truck was not in the driveway at 4:05 p.m. It was seen back in the driveway around 5:30. Scott said he washed some clothes, ate pizza, and then at 5:15, Scott called Sharon, which is Lacy's mom, to see if she knew where Lacy was. What's interesting is Scott said Lacy was missing. Sharon told him maybe you want to check with neighbors and friends, which he did, and they did not know where she was. Sharon then told Ron to call the police. The 911 call, Lacy's stepdad, Ron, he reported her missing, saying, "My son-in-law called. He was playing golf this morning, left at 9:30. My daughter is 8 months pregnant. She took her dog for a walk in the park, and the dog came home with just the leash on." He goes on to describe Lacy as being 26, 5'1", dark hair. He said they got a call from Scott when he got home from golf that Lacy was nowhere around. He tells dispatch Scott is on his way over to the park where Lacy planned to walk their dog, and he asked if dispatch can have a cop meet them out there. He says Scott is all shook. He gives dispatch Scott's cell phone number, and dispatch says they'll have someone out there as soon as they're available. Police meet up with Lacy's mom, stepdad, and Scott at the park. At one point, other relatives and neighbors had shown up as well. Lacy's stepdad asked Scott if he had gone golfing that day. Scott told him he had decided to go fishing instead. So Ron asked Scott, "What time did you go?" Scott told him, and Ron mentioned it was a late time to go fishing. And when he said that, Scott walked off. Scott told a cousin of Lacy's mom and 2 neighbors he had been golfing all day. He also told a friend of Sharon's he wouldn't be surprised if they found blood in his truck because he cut his hands all the time. Officer Matthew Spurlock asked Scott what time he went fishing and also what lure he used. Scott paused, gave a blank look, and after a delay, came up with a size and a color description of the lure. When asked what he was fishing for again, Scott paused, gave a blank look, and mumbled some stuff without actually giving an answer. When police went to Scott and Lacy's, they found no signs of forced entry. Lacy's purse was there, and nothing was missing from the home. They did find wet towels on top of the washing machine, and Scott said he took them out so he could wash the clothes he wore that day. And inside the washing machine were his jeans, t-shirt, and a green pullover jacket. In Scott and Lacy's bedroom, officers saw a laundry hamper that was nearly full of clothes. Scott gave consent for officers to look in his truck, and in the bed of his truck were large patio umbrellas and a tarp. In the cab of the truck, officers found a fishing rod, a bag with a pack of unused fishing lures, and a receipt showing the items had been purchased on December 20th. In the backseat of the cab, officers found a camouflage jacket Scott said he had worn that day while fishing. Now, Scott told investigators he left the house with no jacket on, but put on that green pullover. He put the camouflage jacket on when it started raining. Detective Broccini noted the jacket was dry when it was seen in the truck. Scott also gave officers a receipt for the Berkeley Marina showing he arrived at 12:54 p.m. From there, they went to Scott's business warehouse. The officer saw a homemade anchor in Scott's boat that was made of concrete, but there was no long rope to attach that to the boat. Scott agreed to an interview at the Modesto police station, and there he told him there were no problems in his marriage. The next day, on Christmas Day, Scott had a follow-up interview with investigators from the Department of Justice. In his interview, Scott told investigators he had never been fishing in the San Francisco Bay before, but he wanted to test out his new boat. He said he troll fished, which is dragging a baited line through water, on his way from the marina to Brooks Island for about an hour. In this interview, Scott suggested Lacy may have been robbed by a transient for her jewelry and then kidnapped. Scott also, in this interview, denied being in an affair with anybody. Later that day, Scott calls to check in on the investigation. And during that call, He asked if they would be using cadaver dogs to search for Laci. The investigator told Scott no, because nobody assumes she's dead. In the days after Christmas, search warrants were executed on the Peterson home as well as Scott's warehouse. Traces of blood belonging to Scott were found on a comforter in the master bedroom. They collected items with Laci's scent on them for trailing dogs, including a pair of slippers and a pair of sunglasses. They searched a shed in the backyard and found the cover to Scott's boat, and it smelled heavily of gasoline. Just a side note, at Scott's trial, evidence was introduced that gasoline makes it difficult for trailing dogs to identify a human scent. They also found chunks of concrete in that boat cover and a blue tarp. Inside Scott's truck, they found blood belonging to him. Scott said he cut his hand on the truck door. In the bed of the trunk, they found small chunks of cement and a claw hammer with cement powder on it. At the warehouse, investigators looked in the boat and found a pair of pliers under the middle seat. The pliers had hair clamped in the teeth. DNA testing conducted on that hair later revealed the mitochondrial DNA matched a reference sample from Laci's mom, Sharon. The hair was not a match for Scott. On December 28th, a trailing dog was taken to Berkeley Marina and was presented with Laci's sunglasses. The dog alerted to Laci's scent along a path that led out onto a dock that ended at the water. On December 30th, Scott's mistress, Amber, contacts police. She tells them they have been in a relationship since November, and their first date was November 20th. Amber tells police she had been told by Scott he was unmarried and had no children. A friend advised her that Scott was married and expecting a baby, and also was connected to the disappearance of Laci. That's why she reached out. Amber told investigators that she and Scott were intimate immediately after meeting. In fact, Scott had stayed over at Amber's house. He had picked her daughter up from daycare, had gone to parties with Amber. Scott, Amber, and her daughter had picked out a Christmas tree, and they even talked about their views on having children in the future. Now, on December 6th, that friend of Amber's that set them up told Scott she found out he was married and gave Scott an ultimatum to tell Amber by December 9th or she would. So Scott told Amber he had in fact been married, but he had lost his wife and the upcoming holidays would be the first without her. On December 15th, Scott told Amber he would be in Europe beginning on December 15th and would be staying there through the rest of December and most of January. On December 23rd, when Amber asked where she should send him things while he was out of the country, Scott rented a P.O. box where she could send him letters. The same day, on the 23rd, Scott called Amber and said he was in Maine duck hunting with his dad. He called again on Christmas Day, told her the same thing. Now, Amber met with police and decided to cooperate and recorded calls from Scott to help with the investigation. On New Year's Eve of 2002, Scott called Amber while he was at a vigil for Laci. He told her he was in Paris at the Eiffel Tower watching fireworks. Big old case of diabetes with this one. He called her again on New Year's Day of 2003, saying that he was still in Europe. Now, police confronted Scott on January 3rd with a photo of him and Amber. He just denied that was him in the picture and also denied having an affair. Now, to continue helping police, Amber lied and told Scott she didn't watch the news, but she did hint to Scott that a friend had learned the truth and was going to tell her within a matter of hours. Now, you have to remember at this point, this was all over the news. This was the story. Pregnant mom missing around Christmas. It was everywhere. Only then did Scott admit to Amber that he was married. He also admitted he had not been in Europe or Maine. He had been in Modesto the entire time. Now, in a conversation on January 2nd, Amber asked Scott if Laci knew of the affair. He said she did, and she was fine with it. Later in the month, Scott did an interview and said Laci knew of the affair and was okay with it. He also said in the interview that he disclosed the affair with Amber to police immediately, which he did not. In the month of January, police obtained a warrant to place a surveillance camera outside of Scott and Laci's home, as well as put GPS tracking devices on Scott's cars, including a series of cars and trucks that he rented for a few days at a time. The GPS showed Scott drove 90 miles from his home to the Berkeley Marina at least 5 times in January. He drove a different car each time. January 5th, he drove in a gray Subaru, stayed 5 to 10 minutes, and then left. The next day, January 6th, He drove in a red Honda, stayed a few minutes, and he left. Also, January 6th, the same day where he goes in the red Honda, this is the day when Scott admitted to Amber that his wife was not dead like he told her. He said, "I'm so sorry that this has happened. I'm sorry I hurt you in this way." He said he wanted to be there in person to tell her this, but he said he's lied to her about traveling for work. He said Lacy disappeared just before Christmas, and he's been in Modesto the last 2 weeks with his and Lacy's family looking for her. He said she's just disappeared and no one knows where she's been. He says he can't tell her anymore because he needs her and her daughter to be protected from the media. Amber tells him, "You come to me in December and say you lost your wife. What was that all about?" And he says she's alive. She says, "Where?" Scott says, "Modesto." He said he wanted to tell her in person, but again, he wants to protect her from the media. He said, "If you're watching the news, all the media has been telling everyone that I had something to do with her disappearance for the last 2 weeks." He said he's been hunted by the media during that time. He tells Amber he doesn't want her to be involved and he hopes so much this doesn't hurt her. And then she says, "How can it not affect me?" And he said, "It does." He said he's been torn up these last 2 weeks wanting to tell her, but he's so weak that he hasn't. He tells her she deserves so much better, and she said she deserves an explanation why he said he lost his wife and told her on December 9th that this was the first holiday he would spend without his wife, and now he tells her his wife is missing. She asked him several times for him to tell her why, and she just says she doesn't understand. He tells her he can't. She said, "You broke down and cried in front of me, and I held your hand and comforted you, and you were lying to me." Amber also mentioned she's given people Christmas cards with their photo on it. If you think about how brazen this guy is going to parties, taking photos with her. I mean, he literally didn't care if this got found out, I don't think. I mean, you don't go around to Christmas parties taking pictures of people if you're even half scared of getting caught. That's what always blew my mind. She asked when he was going to tell her in person about this, and he said once they found Lacy. She says he told her they had a future together and that he would do anything for her. And she asked, how is she not going to be dragged into all this? She said she doesn't deserve it. And Scott agrees she doesn't. Scott says he never cheated on her, meaning Amber, and Amber laughs and says, "You're married. How do you figure you never cheated on me?" He says he wants to explain, and maybe in the future she will let him tell her the whole story. She said, "Of course you couldn't tell me the whole story because it hadn't happened yet. And you were hoping to have it resolved in January, and then you would have a story to tell me." She mentions when they first met on their blind date, Scott said he was going to Maine with his family, then on to Paris and Europe. Then after Amber's friend found out he was married, Scott came to her, told this elaborate lie about Lacy, and this would be his first holiday without her. Scott tells Amber he doesn't want to fight with her, and he says he's never told her missing, and he's never used the word tragedy. He said he told her he lost his wife, and Amber asked, "How do you lose your wife before she's lost?" Scott said there are different kinds of loss. Amber also mentions Scott said he did not want to have children, and that her daughter was the only child and she would be his own when they were together. She asked, "Why didn't you tell me you were expecting a baby?" Scott says, "I'm sorry. I can't tell you everything right now." Amber says, assuming we would have been together, how would he have explained his child to her? And he says he's sorry and she just doesn't know everything. She asked if the baby is his. He says he can't tell her everything about it. And she asked why she shouldn't go to the police, and he tells her it's her choice to go to the police. It's her decision. Back to going back and forth to the marina, he makes another one on January 9th in a white pickup truck. January 11th, police shut down surveillance on the home. They feel like their cover had been blown. January 13th, Scott gave 30 days notice that he was terminating his warehouse lease. That, by the way, did not end until October. January 26th, he drives Lacy's Land Rover to the marina. And again, the next day, on the 27th, he drove to the marina in a Dodge Dakota. January 29th, he sold Lacy's car and traded it for a Dodge pickup truck. January 30th, Scott stops mail delivery at their home and had the mail redirected to that post office box that he set up on December 23rd for Amber to send him things to. Also in the month of January, Scott began discussions about selling his and Lacy's home. A nursery they had made for baby Connor was converted into a storage space. February 18th, he canceled their satellite TV service. The company said the reason Scott gave to them was that he was moving overseas. February 19th, police advised Amber just to stop talking to Scott altogether. And so she told Scott they shouldn't speak anymore. A $500,000 reward was posted by a private foundation for information leading to Lacy's safe return. As the months passed, no useful leads turned up. Investigators say if a promising sighting had been reported, Scott would show little interest. And at the trial, the prosecution presented evidence from an authorized wiretap of Scott's phone that showed it took him days to follow up with police about a possible sighting in Washington. And on the contrary, he told his mother and other people he followed up with them immediately. Scott also told a business associate he was waiting near the airport in case he needed to quickly fly to Washington, but police concluded he was nowhere near the airport. So we're going to drop there today. On tomorrow's episode, we're going to get into when they find the body of Lacy and also the body of his unborn son, Connor. And then we're going to go back and dig a little deeper into all this. So we have the big picture. That's it for today. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. We'll see you soon.